But there we go. So welcome to today's webinar. It's not actually a webinar, but it's a meeting to learn about how to write letters to the editor. And my name is Anna Tang, and I am the League's Bicycle Friendly America Program Specialist. And I'm excited to have so many people interested in this topic and joining us today. Like I mentioned earlier, this will be recorded and we will be sharing it later. And because we are expecting such a large group today, I wanted to invite people to introduce yourselves and where you're from, but do it in the chat. So it's not everyone unmuting themselves and going through that, which would take the entire meeting. We're also going to hold our questions and answers until the end of this session, and we will do our best to get to everybody's questions. I also wanted to say that this is going to be very interactive and also fast paced. So if people are comfortable, just unmute yourself when there is a part in the presentation to participate, just so we can keep things moving and on track. And if nobody volunteers, I'm probably just going to call on somebody just to keep the meeting going and keep everything on track. So please feel free to do that. And then finally, I want to introduce our speaker today, who we are thrilled to have with us. Her name is Sara, and she's the Communications and Marketing Director at Cascade Bicycle Club, which is in Washington State. And with that, I will start the presentation and turn it over to Sara. So let me start presenting.
Thanks so much, Anna.
Yep.
And welcome, everyone. It's excited to see all your faces on this Friday morning or Friday afternoon, depending on where you are in the country.
Let me see. I know I have to do the present mode. I haven't, I'll be honest, I haven't used PowerPoint in a while, so I just need to find, okay. Is this?
There you go. You got this. Yep, you're right there. Awesome. Thanks so much, Anna. So today, as you hopefully know, you're in the Letter to the Editor writing training with me from Cascade. I've been doing this training for at least about a decade now, which is kind of exciting. So I'm happy to share what I've learned and what Cascade has learned over the course of our time, just so that we can get you ready to write letters and submit them to your own local newspaper. Anna, next slide, please. Thank you. So just some acknowledgements before I get started. Information here is gathered from personal experience, as well as Netroots Nation, the Wellstone Action, which is formerly NOI, as well as the Know How nonprofit and others. So some of this is personal experience, but some of this is great resources from other folks. Next slide. And a little bit about me. I'm a former journalist. I wrote for newspapers for about 5 years, been working in nonprofits and campaign communications for about 12 years since then. I've drafted and published numerous LTEs for activists across the region, as well as published and written op-eds for myself, as well as for elected officials in a number of newspapers in this region as well. Next slide. So let's start by learning what exactly an LTE, or a letter to the editor, is. At its most basic, it has three main components. It's a short opinion piece published in your local newspaper. It's ties to current news and to your own personal story, and it offers a problem and a solution. And letters that have the best chance of getting published tie to a recent article in the newspaper that you're submitting it to. So I'm going to share a lot more about that, but that's the definition of a letter to the editor at its most basic. Next slide. So before we get to the how we write a letter, let's talk about why activists like you might want to send in a letter to the editor. The number one reason is because your story and your values really make a difference to local decision makers. They send such a powerful message, more powerful than facts alone can ever make a difference. So even when people may not agree on an issue, they can always connect on values. And at the end of the day, policy is the manifestation of our values. Next slide. So you've decided you want to write a letter to the editor. Where do you begin? First, you want to consider your audience. Is your audience young people? Then maybe a letter might not be the medium for you. If it's community members, local leaders, decision makers, this is one strategy you can take along with calls, emails, and in-person or Zoom meetings with that official. And consider your audience also means pick which paper you want to submit to and look up to their letter to the editor submission requirements. Knowing that the word count is before you start writing, and also contact your opinion editor just to let them know you're submitting that letter. That way they can plan it out for the publication that it's going to be in. Second, decide on your topic and angle. What message are you getting out? What is your connection to that message? Maybe e-bikes have changed your life and your ability to navigate around town, and you want skeptics in your community to understand why e-bike tax incentives are really important to you. Or maybe you have a kid and you live close to their school, but you don't feel safe letting them walk to school, and you want to see more funding for safe routes to school. All of those things are just ways to get out your message and fire up your decision makers and local leaders about what you're trying to say. Third tip is to be original. Read the paper, make sure someone hasn't submitted a letter on your same topic before you put it in. Don't be too heavy on talking points. Sharing your story is what makes a letter really powerful and makes the biggest impact. And fourth, organize your commentary, your evidence/story, your solution, and your restatement of your position. And I'm going to elaborate on this part here in a bit. Next slide. So the anatomy of a good LTE, you have just a few words, 150 to 200 words to cover a lot of ground. First and foremost, you're going to need a strong and engaging hook. As the son of an immigrant or as a grandmother of 3 can be your hook, why you're tied to this issue. Or maybe you start with the problem as the hook. Here in Washington, our state spent almost $200 million on a single highway intersection at I-405 and I-167, and yet less than $25 million is budgeted for safe routes to school. That's a great way to get readers hooked in. Second, you want to state the problem. Distracted driving has killed or injured too many people in my community. Make it simple, make it short, get to the point. Third is your compelling ask or resolution. The good news is legislators have a chance to act. XYZ bill, blah, blah, blah. And then finally, restate your position. Every resident deserves a safe place to walk, not just those who can afford a car. Something like that. Next slide. So what that looks like in a letter is a really kind of simple format if you take it at its most basic guts. You have your email subject to the letter to the editor, the opinion editor. It says, "Dear editor," has an engaging hook, states the problem, has your additional info and context. You make your strong ask or your call to action. You restate your position, and then thanks, and you sign it with your city of residence. That's really the most basic anatomy of a letter. Next slide. So I would love to have 4 volunteers, if you're willing, read each of these paragraphs. And I'd love for you to ask yourself as you're reading, is this letter strong or could it have been stronger? What's the hook and what's the resolution? Would anyone like to volunteer themselves?
I'm sad that you have to say that.
Four people want to raise your hands, or would you like me to assign? Okay, awesome. Thank you, Jim. Do you want to take the first paragraph?
Sure.
Connor, do you want to take the second paragraph?
There was
And
not
then,
a word or a sentence that didn't start with I or my.
And then we can have maybe Allison McNally. Would you like to take the third paragraph? And Anton, would you like to take the fourth? And if
I'm
the,
okay with it. First, should I start?
yes, go ahead.
Editor, it was disappointing to read the May 14th story about the non-existent, quote, battle for road supremacy, unquote, between people riding bikes and driving cars. This article perpetuates a dangerous us versus them mentality.
Like most people who bike, I also own and drive a car. When I'm driving my truck, I'm certainly not vying for supremacy. More importantly, when I'm biking or walking, I don't want car drivers to see me as an enemy combatant. Please refrain from using words of war to describe America's horrible lack of road safety.
I'll take the next one. I have commuted by bike for many years, most recently from Bellevue to Seattle. Inattentive drivers and a lack of safety infrastructure are the most dangerous part of my commute, not some perceived lack of rule or following on my part.
Too many people in our region are killed when walking or biking. Just look at past month in Seattle. Both Michael Colmont and Robert Mies were hit and killed by drivers. I encourage you to instead tell stories of substance about the real solutions that could lead to better safety for people driving, bicycling, and walking.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all for volunteering to read. So does anyone have thoughts on what the hook is, what the resolution is here, and whether what could have made this stronger? Jim, how about you in San Diego?
Oh, actually, I liked it. It could have, seems to me, more specific about what actions are required, related, but not specific to this one. Often we hear people, news articles talking about accidents. And many of us are realizing that kind of removes responsibility from the perpetrators and offering suggestions for how to better do that might have made it easier.
Sure. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that feedback. Yeah, I think the hook here is that he's saying, I bike, but I also drive a car, and I'm not vying for supremacy on the road. That makes people think like, whoa, right. Yeah, you're not trying to be better than anyone else when you're driving your truck out there. And then the ask, it's not one tied to any kind of legislation here, but it's just, I encourage you to tell stories of substance about the real solutions that could lead to better driving. So instead of writing about this non-existent battle for road supremacy between people biking and people driving, let's tell real stories about safety in our community. Cool. Thanks everyone for participating. Next slide. Oh, April, did you have something to comment on first?
I was just wondering if maybe including a sentence in there talking about how it impacts him and his desire to bike, or the frequency with which he bikes or where he bikes, might have added benefit.
I love that. Yeah, more of that personal story is always going to be compelling. I think just sharing that, I believe this was our friend Andrew, that Andrew bikes and also owns a car. He talked a little bit about his commute, but I think you're totally right. Awesome. Thank you so much. And next, on to letter writing tips. So dialing in a little further, focusing on a single issue, as we've discussed. The more dialed in your letter is to one issue, the better its chance of being published. So if you have a whole legislative agenda you want to share about, focus on one bill that you're trying to get the editor to care about. Keep it under 150 words if you can. Some papers allow up to 250 words, but that just makes it so much easier to publish and so much more accessible. Third, don't use jargon. For example, if you're writing about BIPOC individuals, please spell out Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or don't use any other jargon to refer to possible programs or bills that you're working on. Make sure that everyone that's reading it can understand it. If you can, try and write the letter in AP style. There's lots of resources out there to look up. There's, for example, AP style doesn't use Oxford comma, even if, maybe Cascade does on our blogs, but if we're writing a letter to the editor or submitting something else, we use AP style. And fourth, respond to something in the current news or a published article really increases its chances. I know I've said that, but it's super important. And finally, and we're going to get to this a bit, tell a story and include a call to action. So what is a call to action? Next slide, please. A call to action is direct, specific, and measurable. It addresses the problem and asks for what you need. So for our article above, it was for the Seattle Times to stop printing cars versus bikes articles. But maybe you're responding to a traffic death in your community and your call to action is for the state to fund the transportation package because it has dollars that tie directly to traffic safety. The more specific we are in our calls to action, the better. Next slide, please. And this has a lot of words on it. So instead of asking folks to read it out loud, I'm going to take a couple of minutes and just be quiet and give you a chance to read it if you can. It's a lot. So I'm going to look at my clock for 2 minutes and then we'll be right back to talk about it. While you're reading, consider the call to action. Is it clear enough? Does this move you? Why would a personal story be helpful to making this a stronger letter? Looks like folks are wrapping up in a couple of minutes. Susan, what's your response?
Well, you asked the question how it could be more impactful, or the ask. What do you think about researching and identifying specific legislators in support or those not in support and calling them out for particular contact?
Yeah, I think this letter has enough. It has enough facts going on. We're really trying to get to the heart of the call to action as well as what the personal story is here. But I like that feedback. Susan, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I'm actually confused about what's in that bill.
Right. Yeah, that is one thing about letters to the editor. When they're responding to another letter, they don't assume they have to lay out all the info again. So just to give some context here, I guess, for you all to help. Senate Bill 5002 is a bill that Washington Bikes, Cascade C4 political action arm, is working on in Olympia this year to lower the blood alcohol limit for drivers to 0.05 from 0.08. And this is an LTE. We actually helped a former state representative publish last week. Connie Ladenburg was a state rep here. So she has a lot of sway in this region in this letter. But when I went and reread it to think about this training, I was like, this doesn't actually do the things I'm recommending to people. It doesn't have her own personal story about drunk driving in it. It has a clear call to action at the end, but it lays out a lot more facts than it does why this issue is connected to her personally. Okay. Is there any other feedback on this letter or any other thoughts about what you would do different? Ellen.
This is Heidi. There's a similar thing going on in Charlotte, North Carolina this week about there was money attached to a DWI task force, and there was debate about whether or not they should do that. One of the things they brought up was that although the number of DWI convictions have gone down, the number of deaths by people killed by alcohol-related vehicle crashes is going up. And I know you said there are enough facts here, but if in fact there was something like that that showed that not doing this has a counteraction that's worse, it's something that might be considered.
Thank you so much. Alan, how about you?
Yeah, one of the issues about, trying to get a personal story in on everything is, frankly, sometimes there's issues where you see what's going on abstractly that you want to comment on, but it hasn't directly affected you. I mean, if she hasn't been hit by a drunk driver or, or been involved in something directly, but she has that view, she wants to say, hey, other states are doing this. And by the way, I think it would have helped just a little bit, certainly we're a little out of context, is when she named the bill, the bill to lower the blood alcohol for drunk driving. I mean, I had to read it twice to figure out where she was going. But sometimes you need, you are actually working abstractly, or you're just venturing for the future, and you can't really do a directly personal story.
That's a very fair point. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, sometimes it's, especially when it's a local legislator that you're getting to sign on, maybe her sway is more important than the story aspect there.
Or you could lie.
Well, we try not to do that. I really don't like making up stories for people that aren't true. I appreciate that. Okay. Well, thank you all for your input there. That's actually super helpful. Next slide. Let's go to restate your position. So we've talked about the hook a little. We've talked about stating the problem and making the compelling ask and resolution. Now I want to talk about kind of restating your position and that kind of emotional arc that you want to take people on to really make a difference. So, the best letters op-eds take the reader on an emotional journey, regardless of who's signing it, but it's from anger to vindication, from fear to safety, from sadness to solidarity. So say I want to write a letter to the editor about being a pedestrian here in Tacoma where I live. I start with my concern that everyone deserves a safe place to walk and ride a bike. Here in Tacoma, I can't even walk at a flashing stoplight without being nearly run over, which is sadly true. But I end the letter with safety restored with my call to action and restating my position to take readers on that emotional arc. By passing the vulnerable road user law, leaders can protect people biking and walking from being hit or killed on our streets. No one deserves to die because of a careless driver. So you can see how that arc from that fear and concern for my safety leads to being restored with the vulnerable road user law and restating the position to really drive it home. And you'll see this arc in just about every kind of storytelling that you receive, whether it's an action alert email, if it's a letter to the editor, if it's an op-ed. These kinds of arcs make the most powerful storytelling in writing. Okay, next slide. So now that we have our hook, we have our call to action, we have the restatement of our position, You're ready to submit your letter. First up, I really recommend just a simple Google search for the paper's name of where you want to submit it, plus letter to the editor. You'll learn whether they use a form that you need to fill out, what the word count is, whether it's actually an email address for the opinion editor that you need to send it to. Include your name and address on that letter. That only helps them contact you if they have more information, your phone number as well. They won't publish anything but the city of your residence. It's just for their own information. And now when you're ready to submit, my number one rule that I see activists kind of break all the time is please do not submit your LTE to multiple newspapers at once. It's kind of a common mistake to assume like you're trying to blast out your message. You really want to get it across. So you're going to submit to every paper in your state or in your region. I really recommend dialing in and being focused on one newspaper at a time and giving it 7 days. If you haven't seen your letter or haven't heard anything from the opinion editor, go ahead and give them a call or shoot them an email and say, hey, do you plan to publish this letter? Usually at that point, they'll let you know yes or no. And if they say no, that's when you can try and submit it somewhere else. But make sure you give it time, because nothing will burn relationships with editorial page or opinion editors than publishing a letter in multiple newspapers across the region. Next slide. So here are our takeaways for today's training. A letter to the editor responds to current news or a recent article. It includes a personal story, if you have one, a problem and a solution. It includes one issue. It has a direct call to action. It restates the author's position and considers the emotional journey that it takes readers on. It's 150 to 200 words and doesn't use jargon or acronyms. It's submitted to one paper with the correct word count. And the author includes their address and phone number. And final slide. Are there any questions? Oh, my cute cat picture didn't show up here. Okay.
Yeah, feel free to like either raise your hand, unmute yourself, or type if you have a question in the chat and I can ask it verbally out loud. But yeah, we can start with Jim.
I got in a little bit late, my bad, but I heard you say something about target audiences, and most of us, I guess, I got the impression that a letter to the editor, especially to print media, is not going to hit all the demographics. It's going to hit old people like me who subscribe to newspapers. What do you suggest for, or are you talking about submitting letters to the editor in other media, and could you maybe cover that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jim. Yeah, when I talked about considering your audience at the beginning, a letter is really focused on community leaders, local decision makers, and folks who are reading newspapers. I think you're right that as a former journalist, I still subscribe to multiple newspapers, but in my elder millennial demographic, I may be somewhat alone in that. I might not be alone, but I don't know. So if you're trying to reach different audiences, you're thinking about what format and what kind of medium you want to go through. Social media, of course, is a great way that you're going to be able to reach young people, though it's harder and harder to break through the algorithm. That's why you see a lot more folks using either influencers or other folks who they don't have to advertise as highly to get through to different audiences. And there's going to be a lot of other tools, including, live actions, right? That are great ways to make an impact in your community. But LTE is specifically geared towards decision makers and local community leaders, because I can guarantee that your community leaders are reading the newspaper on a regular basis, or they should be.
Alan, you put your hand down, but did you have a question?
Well, mine was very close to Jim's in terms of the effectiveness of the physical letter to the editor. I mean, I myself, I am in the older baby boomer demographic, shall we say. And I have given up print as much as possible. I have tablets and I try to read the electronic versions. But frankly, when I look at the newspaper sites, the letter to the editor is probably one that I almost totally exclude reading. Yeah. Whereas in the old days with the newspaper, I mean, something might catch your eye, even if you weren't particularly, looking for something there. So I agree that this is primarily not really a message to the people, but to the influencers who are trying to keep track of what's going on in their community.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Right. I do read letters to the editor because I'd like to keep tabs on what local folks are thinking about certain issues, especially when Washington Bikes or Cascade have bills that we're working on or legislation we're working on. But I think that's fair.
We've got a few questions in the chat. So the first one is, what's the threshold for how far back a letter to the editor can reference a previously published article? 2 weeks?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, that's a really good one. Honestly, you want to keep it pretty timely. I try to get a response in within kind of 7 to 10 days of an article being published at the latest. And then, of course, that the opinion editor may not have time to publish it right away. So that letter from Connie Ladenburg here in Tacoma, that actually took an additional 3 or 4 weeks to get published. So you just have your Google alerts out and you're ready to see if it gets in there. But the bill is still thankfully live and moving forward in Olympia. So it still mattered and was timely. If it had died in that meantime, it might have been a little more awkward, but thankfully it's still going forward.
I'm gonna just stop sharing so we can all see each other again. I didn't want to just stop sharing randomly without saying that first. Seth, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks. Just to follow up on that, one thing I've done in the past is to create, for different issues, is to create rapid response teams. Say we're working on a particular piece of legislation, a particular issue, but a newspaper article, something might only be published every so often. So to have like a crew ready to respond to that pretty quickly. Do y'all have any resources along those lines of like having a team of volunteers in the bike ped space ready to react to articles with letters to the editor ready to go, like a guide or a toolkit or something like that, that we can create a rapid response team?
That's a super great point, Seth. I think I did more of that. I used to work at Planned Parenthood Votes Northwest, and we had organizers all over the state at that organization. So I had a list of folks out in the community who had a specific issue that they were, really passionate about. And if that issue came forward, I could tap that sort of story bank of folks in order to get them to sign on to a letter. But that's a really helpful tool. We don't so much have that at Cascade. We certainly have folks that are really active in our advocacy space that we feel confident reaching out to, but I think that's a really helpful, if you can have a story bank of folks and know the issue they already care about, it's much easier to say, hey, Joaquin, can you sign on to this letter? I know you really care about bike safety over in Yakima. That's super helpful.
We have a question about AP style. Is that something that, I'll just read it. You mentioned things like writing an AP style, and I wondered if these tips are just about keeping communication easy to understand, or if editors actually make a call on including a letter based on that.
That's an interesting question. The easier it is to read, I think it's always going to have a better chance of getting published. A lot of editors, one of the reasons that you're including your name, address, and phone number is so if they have some small tweaks or edits to your letter, they can let you know. Like, hey, I had to change the formatting of this sentence. I didn't change what you're trying to say here, but I wanted to let you know that I made this edit. So that's an AP style is just the general style of newspapers and journalism overall. So they don't expect necessarily that folks like you know it. if you have a PR person or you know someone in your life that is a journalist or a former journalist, you know, it might help to ask them to look over it, but it's not going to be the reason your letter doesn't get published if it's not in AP style. So that's a good question.
Mhm. The next one is, one idea we've had is to work together and publish a series of letters to the editor from different voices in our community so our issue keeps showing up. Have you seen examples of this kind of strategy?
Yeah, that's a great strategy. If you have a number of voices, each with a slightly different message, but on the same topic that are continuing to, you know, if you're not repeating talking points, if you're making sure that you're sharing each individual's stories, I think that's a really powerful tool. You know, if they're, especially if each of them individually are submitting their own letter and it's not, you know, like for Connie Ladenburg, I actually submitted her letter because we drafted that and she signed it as the local representative who really cares about making Washington State a better place to live. But if it's coming from those individuals, you have an even stronger chance of them getting published instead of from maybe the organization that is gathering those folks to be drafters of those letters. I love the Oxford comma votes. I am pro Oxford comma. I want you to know it's only AP style that says not to use it.
Could you talk about Google Alerts and how you use them?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes. So in communications, I generally have, I mean, I have them set up for all kinds of different things. I have them set up for my own name for when, because sometimes like a letter might get published 7 weeks away, like I mentioned, and I've stopped looking for it. I have Google Alerts set up for each organization's name, for Cascade Bicycle Club, our C3, and Washington Bikes, our C4. I have Google Alerts set up for Paul Tolmay, who's our kind of PR strategy person here, and our executive director's name in case he gets mentioned, because he might be asked on some questions specifically about policy. So having a number of them set up on the folks you expect to see quoted in articles is really helpful for being able to track what news stories or what letters and op-eds are being published.
Great, thanks. Over to Zach. If you want to unmute yourself, yeah.
Yeah, I was curious, Sarah, how do you know if, so say you get your letter to the editor published, how do you know that it's reaching the appropriate audience and that you shouldn't be pursuing a different publication instead to make sure that, you know, your call to action is actually being seen by the folks who are going to make an impact with it? Because I imagine you may see that your letter gets published, but if it's not reaching the right politicians or the right groups, you know, you could be putting that effort elsewhere that could be making a bigger impact.
Yeah, that's a good question. And thank you for being here, Zach. Zach is Cascade's new volunteer coordinator and has really hit the ground running. So I appreciate, I invited all of staff and Zach showed up. So I appreciate that. I think that's a good question. You know, I'm thinking about, there was an insurance issue back in, gosh, it was probably 2010 or 2011 that I was writing an editor or an op-ed for Insurance Commissioner Mike Kreidler to publish, and the Seattle Times wasn't interested in it, but the Yakima Herald was. And frankly, I will take the next biggest newspaper, because there's still people that we're really trying to reach across the state on that issue, especially if it's an op-ed by someone with his title. It's going to get picked up by the AP, the Associated Press, and probably shared to other newspapers as well. So if you can't break through with the biggest newspaper in your region on it, especially on an op-ed like that, really go beyond. But for a letter to the editor, it's really about contacting the folks in your community. The Seattle Times, this is probably confusing. The Seattle Times will publish letters from people across this state because they consider themselves the paper of record for the state of Washington. So similar to, I think it's the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette is like the state of record for Pennsylvania, and the Washington Post may serve DC, but it's also a national publication. So they're the state, you know, the paper of record will publish letters from everywhere, but for your own community newspaper, they're really looking for folks that live in that community to speak to that audience. Does that help? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Let's do one more question. Are there any, and I'll try to combine the two that are in here, but it's like, are there any studies which determine which methods of communication or outreach that result in actual action? Is there anything like that? And like maybe like what's a good tool for doing like surveys or showing that support to include?
Man, that's a good question because there's so many different tactics and it depends on who you're trying to reach. I still think email is, we thought email was going to die. It has not. We're still getting 30 to 40% open rates on our emails, sending out action alerts that way that say contact your legislators about this issue. So that's still a really powerful tool. Of course, direct contact with your, setting up a meeting with your legislator is still really powerful. And LTE definitely isn't maybe the strongest tool for determining action, but it can sway and create that conversation and that message overall in your community. It may not get the bill passed, but it's going to make people think about why they should care about this issue. And I saw there's one question, I think just flew by my eyeballs in the chat that I think is one I should answer to. What's the difference between an op-ed and a letter to the editor? So an op-ed is it's a longer form opinion piece that is written by the community, often they're usually more from kind of stately people, like local decision makers and people that are making an impact. They can be from local community members as well, but having some sort of a tie to the issue gives you a stronger chance of getting that letter published. So a board member of an organization versus, the PR person working at an organization, or a state legislator or the state Department of Transportation person, those are the folks that they're looking to publish op-eds from. Whereas a letter to the editor can really be more grassroots focused. However, for someone that has a really strong story, when I was at Planned Parenthood, we were working on Ref 74, the marriage equality bill here. And I had someone who had a really strong story of growing up gay in Eastern Washington and telling that story and where she was accepted and where she wasn't in her life and what it mattered, what it meant to her. And so that kind of story got published in her as an op-ed in her local paper, just because it was such a powerful story about a current issue. But for the most part, your op-eds are going to be from those bigger, more stately people on a certain topic.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm sure you know of like many resources. April just asked if there were like places to find resources on this. So I don't know if you have one like quick off the top of your head before we wrap up.
Oh gosh, that is a good question. I have been doing this for so long. I know. Actually, resources.org. They're a really good kind of writing overall sort of organization. Let me drop that in the chat. I've used they kind of have this sort of planning tool that they have that makes it really simple and breaks it down similar to what I was saying. It has similar tips to it. I'll drop that here in the chat. Oh, no, that's the question and answer. There's the chat. So it's re-sources.org/writing LTEs. I know I've heard good things about, and it's a nonprofit, so that's what's nice.
Great, thank you so much. And just like as a final note, I just wanted to say thank you to Sara so much for doing this presentation. I know that this is a very like compelling advocacy tool, and the more biking and walking voices that we can get out there and joining the general public, the better chance we have of growing our movement and growing this voice across the country. So hopefully you write your letter to the editor. If you write one, feel free to share it with us. I would love to see what you've written, and I can share it with Sara as well. And thank you for spending this 45 minutes with us today. I hope you learned something. And just as a final plug, at least from the league side, if you want to continue these kind of conversations and meet advocates, it's not too late to register for our National Bike Summit, which is coming up at the end of this month, March 26th through the 29th. And you can register here at the link that I shared in the chat, and you can also find it on our website. This is hopefully the first of a series of advocacy webinars that we will be doing this year. I saw some people suggesting topics, which I love. So if you have any other topics that you would like me to see happen, just let me know, and I'll do my best to put that together. The next one isn't scheduled yet, but if you subscribe to our newsletter and stay tuned, you will be able to hear about them. And just thank you so much. The recording will be shared and the slides should be shared as well. So stay tuned and look for that. We do have a link on our website, which I will share quickly too, just so that you know where to find this kind of stuff. We have a website that just hosts like a link to all of our webinars, past and upcoming, so you can find them there. And just thank you again, and thank you, Sarah, again. And everybody have a great rest of your day and a wonderful weekend.
Happy Friday, everyone. Bye.
Bye.